Okay, you can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you'd like to have a seat, we're about to begin. Really excited about our panel today, which I'm co-moderating with Bridget here. We will be discussing the topic of scaling social value. We have three exciting panelists with us. Ulrika, Senior Research Manager with Catella for European Residential. Tim, Managing Director at Business of Cities. Joe, Executive Director with CBRE. Shall we get into it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Adina. So it's about real estate, where we're going to discuss how we can scaling social value by real estate. And I think real estate can be the key and the lock to build on social value in cities. So that's a very interesting point of view. So how do we get social value rolling? I'm a strong believer of a law, and it says if a place has no social value, it has no future value, and therefore it won't have an economic value. But we have to discuss that and how we can bring that into the real estate companies, this belief. So this session will be like a small mini hackathon, because I think after all the sessions we had this morning and yesterday, all the great examples you saw, everyone should believe in social value. The question is, which barriers do we have to break to really bring social value to a building or to an area? What are the shared drivers? Is it real estate against the municipality, against the students, against all these facilities, or can we work together? The question is, of course, yes, we can work together. Why don't we do that? So which barriers do we have to break down? And can we improve this cooperation together if it's not longer a short transaction, real estate, we make this building, we make this location, and then it's over, it's a transaction? Can we work on a lifetime relationship and then bring social value to this area or to this building? That's the main topics we are going to discuss, I think, I hope. So maybe we start. Yeah, we start with a question. Are we all on the same page? And you all have the app. Christina is there. So we ask the same question to you. What is social value? Adina, please.
Yes. Also on the app, if you have any questions for us, please do submit them, and we will come to them towards the end of the session.
Yes,
but
please.
yes, to kick us off, we thought we would all just get on the same page or share kind of what we each think about what social value means to us and why it is important. And I'll kick it off. I found a definition that I quite liked. I can't take credit for it. It is from the UK Green Building Council. And it goes in the following way. In the context of the built environment, social value is created when buildings, places, and infrastructure support environmental, economic, and social well-being, and in doing so, improve the quality of life of people. Ulrika, I turn to you.
Do you agree?
Do you agree? Do you have something to add? Would you tweak it?
Yes, I think I can agree on that. But what I personally think and what we also stand for is that if we talk about social value as an investor, you always have kind of a responsibility towards also the people being in the end letting your apartments, renting out your apartments. And if we talk about student housing, I think we have a quite high social responsibility because we're talking about a target class, for which it makes a real difference if the price is 800 euros or 850, because those 50 euros may have an impact on their life, and that might be some money where they can go shopping for. So my personal view is we need to be quite sensible with the target group we're talking about, and in the end, it's all about the students who may not be able to afford 800 euros a month, and we need to think about them. And if we start to think about those people, we're really in the discussion of how can we create social value also as an investor for real estate.
Yeah, that's interesting because we're now in a real estate session and the first question is answered by adding money to it. And I can understand that because when you work at CBRE, it's about KPIs and it's about profits, things like that. Do you have to explain within the CBRE that it's more than that?
With CBRE.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not explaining.
Oh my gosh.
But that's not a. But that's
Please
not.
leave that out. Thank you.
But that's
Catella, of course, I know.
Yeah,
Yes,
no.
of course.
I think what we basically have, and what also our clients understand, is that in all over Europe we have a real big topic, and that is besides ESG affordability, and we have an affordability crisis. We're not constructing enough apartments for not only students but also for normal people, for key workers, not earning as much as we all do. To be honest, I mean, we're all in good positions. We're all in the real estate market, and everything works well for us. Even during COVID, everything worked well for us. So, and basically, if you explain to your clients, okay, this is the situation, and within all the ESG discussions we have.
Yeah.
And which also clients require, deal with ESG. We also have the S in ESG. And then we're talking also about a lot of people who cannot afford the apartment in a great location, in a capital city. We're talking about B, C, D locations. We're talking about social housing. And I think when it comes to student housing, having a look at Germany, well, social housing for students, but there is not a lot. I mean, there's this subsidized student housing, as we know, which is not in the quality as we want it, not in the quality as students want it, but this is our view. We need to focus on the affordability because this crisis we're in might lead to more job losses as we think of now. So as the bad scenario. Yeah.
So the economic aspect is very important to social value conversation. Tim, can we come to you?
CBRE, please.
Not
Sorry
yet.
for that.
We'll come to Joe shortly. Tim, do you want to jump in here? And
Sure. I mean, I would say coming at this from somebody who works in lots of cities, advises a lot of innovation districts and other locations in cities around the world, the idea of social value is quite new and novel in a certain way, but of course we know that there have been variations or iterations on this idea. I think that the difference between this new idea and this new model is that it is no longer about everything that comes after the economic side and the profit-making side and the innovation side. In fact, actually, one needs to understand the roles this plays in that process and start to integrate it in all aspects of one's place creation or one's city building. And so I think that means that we have to start thinking in different ways about what social value is. Yes, it's opportunity in terms of more people being able to either come in, afford to be part of a particular location, ability to really enter the job market and the labor market. So it's opportunity, but it's also about building know-how and social capital, the ability for people to network and relate to each other rather than us all be in silos. Some places can be very successful, but nevertheless, people are very verticalized. They're not really operating across organizations or disciplines, and that doesn't create the resilience that you need when you're both trying to produce the ideas of the future, but also create that texture that actually makes a location work in the long term. So I think there's something about this idea of social value that's involving investing in resilience, that it goes outside of your department, outside of your institution, outside of your building. You've got to spend at least double the time spending time outside and thinking about outside your current space. And social value is both a challenge to think of integration, but also act in a different sort of way, I would say that the districts and the places that we work in where you can see real forward momentum are the ones where this isn't sort of the last chapter in their strategy or the last thing that they do at the end of the week, or it's some kind of tokenistic thing. It's actually built in, and they're trying to rework and rewire and also invest in new kinds of KPIs that incentivize us to change, because I think after all we have to behave differently for this to really make sense.
Yeah, because you're adding also the businesses who wants to be in this city, and for them it's very important in this war on talent and in this human capital frame we are, that you have businesses and students together because they can work together. And when she's speaking of affordable houses, can it also be a business model that it's not about lower rents but higher income? That can have the same effect. So you're paying students for their traineeship or something like that? Is that...
Absolutely. If you look in places like Philadelphia or San Diego, North American models of innovation and inclusion that are quite mature, it's much more about diversifying who becomes part of that innovation community. Yeah. Anchor institutions, anchor businesses really coming together to pay for shared services, shared opportunities. They're actually part of 15, 20-year relationships, individuals at the leadership level with real trust between them saying, yeah, we're going to put some money into that, and we're going to find ways for this not just to be, low income or low sort of duration opportunities, but they're really part of a larger growing mid-skill and mid-income and above workforce in the whole city, and that's what you see.
And then it's the students may be a kind of stakeholder in this whole community of affordable houses. Yeah. It's interesting.
I think, and more broadly, with operational real estate such as residential and not just student, but co-living, build-to-rent, senior living, I think we're seeing the need for a lot more to happen in these buildings beyond just housing, which I think kind of starts the conversation around what sort of concepts are we bringing in, how else are they integrating within the wider community, what other benefits are they bringing to the wider community. I know at Greystar we spend a lot of time thinking about that, and on that note, I do want to bring Joe into the conversation and touch on what's been going on in the co-living space across Europe as well, and if you want to jump in on the definition on social value.
So great to be here, by the way. I'm very pleased to have made the trip. I think how I think about social value, and just to slightly add to Adina's already very thorough definition, and I'm going to borrow an analogy that we've actually heard today already, but if you think of the building as hardware and social value as the software, the computer doesn't work without the software. And I think that, to me, social value is quite a lot about community, a sense of connectedness, the friendships that can be formed within a residence, and the networking potential. So I definitely think that that is a really important way of understanding it. I think it can also be expressed economically. And certainly in the UK and in London in particular, as a requirement of planning, you very likely would have to offer some discounted market rents, which would apply to both student accommodation and co-living. And those discounted rooms may also be specifically targeted at students on lower incomes or key workers in co-living schemes, for example. So it also helps to create diverse communities, and I think that's really important, that the schemes are not just all filled up with either very wealthy international students or very well-heeled single professional people, that there is more of a kind of diversity being created within the scheme. I also think that mental health and well-being comes under this general social value umbrella as well. And I think the mental health piece is very much playing to this phenomenon of social isolation that we have in society. And I think the pandemic has totally blown the lid off this. And I mean, I am a single professional person, and I have spent more time in my own company in the last 18 months than I ever want to again. And so I think that overcoming social isolation is really important in society. It covers health and fitness. And I think that there can be wider benefits to the community of building managed residential schemes under student accommodation or co-living brackets. I think that can be understood in terms of bringing talent into a location. So it could expand the talent pool available to work in that area. It could contribute to regeneration of the built environment. So it just could make a scruffy site look much better. And there are also some of the facilities in the scheme, like a cafe or a co-working space, could also be used by the local community. And I think that that is a social benefit. So I think that's kind of how I understand it.
Yeah, it's more a community then. It's not
For me, yes.
Yeah. And is it
Yeah.
because, well, when we're in the real estate business, you think you are in the business of bricks and the hard business, and you say, well, we're actually in the social business.
Yes.
What do they think of that inside your company? Do they think you're a tree cuddler? Do you think, well, she's got a bit too far? Do they understand what you're trying to say here, that it's about community?
I think they do, because we are about to, we're coming to, CBRE in London is coming to the end of a 2-year project to rebuild our headquarters building. And a lot of what I've been describing in terms of facilitating collaboration spaces, health and fitness proposition, a healthy food proposition, and reaching a very high standard of, I can't remember the accreditation scheme, but we're going for the maximum in terms of like wellness in offices. And so I think that my employer absolutely does get this, actually.
Yeah, is that also because of the war of talent we just discussed, that people are almost expecting that from your employee or from your business?
Sure, I think almost all the evidence we have is that the war for talent in many areas has intensified, even though there's been more restrictions on mobility of talent for some time. And I think it also means it's not just about the workplace environment, the workplace setting, and the workplace convenience and opportunity, but it's also about people beginning to affiliate a little bit more with neighborhoods or with cities that they view to align with their values. The war for talent is also that talent is highly, as we were hearing earlier on, highly selective, highly informed geographically and in all sorts of senses about where places are going, and therefore they really find, they might often find they're in a fantastic physical setting, but actually it's in a rather anemic wider environment that doesn't allow them to develop impact or experience things or engage with enough of a range of people. So there's that precedent and requirement to look outside, I think, again, reveals itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we go to the poll?
Yes, please.
Check on the first question.
What do you think social value means? Christina.
So the question here is actually, does social value figure in your investment or management decisions at the outset of a project? That is the first question. The highest answer is definitely, with 43%. And then tied with 29% each, we have increasingly so and not yet. So we're getting there.
Okay.
Slowly, I think that's an improvement on a few years ago under the spect.
Yeah. Is it because Christina Bolland, she said in her keynote that in times of crisis you do a lot of innovation and it brings other solutions. Is that something that people are now more prepared to do more innovation on this subject?
Well, no, I think at Catella we also did this prior to COVID. So we always thought about where's affordability and this whole affordability crisis we're in leading to. And you have a responsibility as an investor. Well, you cannot only go for return. I mean, we all go for return, but the question is to what price. So if you acquire affordable housing, your return gets low. That's lower than for free housing, but you also have a stable cash flow. And well, you can maybe within your project development say, okay, we acquire something in a rich city, it is social housing, so we also contribute something to an affordability crisis, and this is where your responsibility is. What I basically think is why also you say the answer is now higher than 2 years ago is also basically something quite easy. We all need to deal with ESG, and I think the most complicated thing is to define the S in ESG. So the E is easy to measure, and
environment,
also,
yeah.
yes, and
yeah.
also the governmental factors are easy to measure.
Yeah.
But with the S, I mean, to be honest, we all struggle a bit.
Yeah.
So this is our next question.
Yeah.
How do we measure?
How do we measure? Yeah.
The impact that we're or the strides that we're making in with social value?
That's it. That's the key question, because then you can prove within the company that it's working or it's not working.
Yeah.
Track and iterate. Do you want to take that, or should we open it up to the rest of the panel? And
well, I can also
measure?
take it, but I can still repeat myself. So we always have a look at that we are not in the prime segment when we acquire something. So this is our belief, and it's not the way that you always need to invest in the prime locations.
No.
So also in a secondary location can be very attractive for you, and fulfill the needs of a maybe bigger target group than we're talking about within some products.
And is it also because our industry, the real estate industry, it's very sector by sector. It's offices, residential, it's all the facilities. And when you mix it more or even blend it more in a building or an area, you get a different kind of business model. Does that help you?
You definitely get this. I mean, in Germany, also in real estate, in a lot of cities, it is the case that if you acquire something which has an amount of some square meters, the city says, okay, 1/3 of that needs to be subsidized. And sometimes it's really nice. So we acquired something where it's mixed within the building, so that the key worker can actually or lives actually next to the doctor. So to avoid a bit more gentrification, the problem we're all aware of. We've had this in the past, and we've learned out of it. And I think those are concepts that really bring value and bring also key workers into good locations, into cities with subsidized housing.
Okay.
So how else? How are cities looking at measuring social value?
Great question. I think particularly we see the innovation happening, as I say, at that slightly micro level of districts where a lot of organizations, public or private, usually, in fact, often in partnership, are building new kinds of indices, new mechanisms to measure, rather than measuring bums on seats, in effect, or often trying to measure inputs, which often encourages a tokenistic approach of how many people showed up to something, or it was much more about trying to, it often rewards just thin initiatives. Actually, what they're trying to do is create mechanisms of measuring outcomes over a 5 or 10 year period, broad-based prosperity, number of tracking relationships. So there's a lot more mapping going on between how many relationships inside buildings, beyond buildings, and maybe students and employers and entrepreneurship organizations and local government. How much do they interact? Where are their joint ventures? What are the size of their collaborative projects? There's many innovations happening. I've seen it happen particularly in the UK, but also in Scandinavian countries. I'd mention Oslo and Gothenburg in that regard. And you see it in Canada as well, more sophisticated attempts. And these are normally work well when they're devised and delivered by more than one entity, because then they can start to think through the relationship side, which I think is what we're talking about.
And can that also be a kind of KPI?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amount
and
of
trying to convince those in government as well to sometimes not be so obsessed with those input measures and much more obsessed with the intangibles, which you obviously need to be careful about how that is produced and monitored. But I think there's a lot happening there, and a lot of people who are interested in innovation in the long run and mission-led innovation are working very hard at that. So I think it's up to those interested to spot the good practice and build on it, and also develop one's own tools. There's not a one-size-fits-all index or approach to it. No. It depends on what kind of location you are.
Yeah, and it's also about the amount of years you have to follow people before you can really prove that it helped them on a social scale. So it would be great if you, from a research kind of point of view, if you can follow people and see if it helped them in their career, if they had a good start. But then you're 10 years later, you
need big institutions, often a university in vicinity. You need technology on your side, and you need relationships, as we were hearing earlier on. Many universities and institutions struggle to keep track or keep tabs in a meaningful way, and all of those things can come together. You do see it. It's not impossible. What we're describing here is just, it's a thin end of a potential wedge that it could get much bigger.
Yeah, I think with professional management companies now, kind of taking on a lot larger scale projects, they are also bringing in the tools to measure a lot more. Joe, what are you seeing in terms of what some operators are doing that's interesting in terms of how they're measuring or what they're doing to promote social value?
I think this is a really critical question, and within our, those who know me will know I'm in valuation at CBRE. Within our valuation business, we have actually employed an ESG expert to help us work out how to reflect ESG in valuations. I think it's the difference between real estate viewed as purely an economic entity and making it into an exciting and fun place to live. And I think that if it is an exciting and fun place to live and that is done successfully, it will show, for example, in social media ratings. So I think when ESG, when social value is working, it will drive a sort of positive spiral of rebookings, occupancy, perhaps showing in rates. It will become popular as a place to live by reputation. When it's not working, the reverse would be true. So if it gets bad ratings on social media or has a reputation locally, the reverse would be true. The occupancy would start to suffer, and you wouldn't get so many bookings and rebookings. So, and that occupancy and rebooking thing would show in valuation. So I think that it is measurable, but like all things with ESG, we are dealing with intangible things like climate change, for example, and trying to express them in financial terms, which is problematic and not that obvious how you do it. And at the moment, we are on an exercise of engaging with our clients as to how they measure it. And I think that we're not as far on this journey as we think we are. I think we're actually just at the start of learning how to measure these things, actually. But I think that it is possible, and I think the fact that we're now talking about it, that there is a live debate around this, will lead us to a place where it can be measured. It will become clear how we measure it.
I think we do want to get into some examples, but should we check in with the poll on our second question?
Yeah. Absolutely. So obviously what we've spoken about, there's many different factors in social value. So the question here is, what element or part of social value does your work focus on? So this is for everybody in the audience here today. 57% say community, supporting Joe's points right there. 36% say affordable rents, which was actually a topic from this morning's discussion as well, accessibility. And 7% is well-being. 0% said occupancy and rebooking.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry, 7%?
said well-being.
Only 7%.
But
Maybe
it's
they
hard to
think
say because they're
community.
so interconnected, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Community, well-being.
Yeah,
Maybe we didn't phrase the
Yes.
question correctly.
it was the wrong question. And is it also about the skill? Because I can imagine that if you only have a small part of a larger area where you can add buildings or with social value affordable rents, then it's rather expensive. If you can add it to a greater area and also combine it with private housing or with more commercial type of facilities, that it can be more affordable. Is that, or does it have to be only students, for instance, and then all students on less
I mean, like
location?
hybrid
Yeah,
tenancies
yeah.
or a hybrid residential product that sort of subsidizes one element. I think that's the idea in London with discounted market rent units, or the idea in where we see short stay and long stay product combined in one building, or bringing in co-working at the base of a residential building. I think with more flexible working, remote working in general, we're certainly looking at that element, and of course, putting
And
in
it's more a
F&B.
business model for the whole area, and
Yeah,
then
of
it can
course.
be easier to develop.
You
maybe.
could do a lot
Yeah,
more. You can
yeah.
support local entrepreneurs who are, looking for accelerators in the local area, through providing that sort of amenity in kind of new neighborhoods. So I do want to get into some concrete examples a little bit. And Joe, you and I were talking earlier about a regen project. I know we've seen a lot of regen projects together over the years. Do you want to give a little bit of detail on that?
So I think my best example that I've seen of adding social value, and I'm going to leave activities in schemes to others on the panel to comment on. DTZ Investment Management funded a co-living scheme in the Borough of Wandsworth in London, and it was in a riverside setting. And this is a scheme that has discounted market rents, which will be offered to key workers first. So creating an inclusive community was very much the intention. But its riverside setting, it's along a kind of riverside trail, and there was a break in the trail. So there was a section where you had to go and walk around some streets and then rejoin the trail. And basically the scheme will join up the missing section. So it's creating a sort of local social benefit of improving the river trail, and it's very much a regeneration of a site that has lain long fallow and had some access difficulties which they overcame. So that is actually quite an interesting example of creating
Placemaking.
yes, placemaking, exactly that.
Yeah.
And also that the cafe and co-working area on the ground floor will front onto the river trail. So it means that if you're walking along the river trail, it's a nice place to actually stop and have a drink or whatever. So
And I think they had to think about that when they were first designing the building. So to your earlier point, you think about, this isn't an afterthought. You think about it as you're kind of designing the building and the future community that's going to live there. It's very much front and center. I know it is for us in our developments, kind of how is this going to integrate in the wider community? It's not just an isolated building, glass tower that no one can come into. We're looking to make the buildings a lot more permeable and engage with the local neighbors. Do you want to jump in to the conversation on any examples you've seen that are interesting? It doesn't have to be from your portfolio, just anything that you like, admire, appreciate.
Well, I basically think I gave the example that bigger districts try to create social value and not get key workers out of the city or to the outskirts of the city. And I think we see a lot of cities who have the ambition today and also say the developers, you can build whatever you want, but to a limited extent. I want you to do social housing, and I mean, what actually would be wishful is that this also happens within student housing a bit more than it does. So that we're not only talking about those ones who can afford to live in an asset with great community spaces, and don't get me wrong, I mean, it's nice to have big community spaces also as a student, but when talking about 1,000 euros a month, we're talking about a smaller target group than if we talk about 500 euros a month, depending on which city you are. But let's take Berlin. So in an, let's say, standard student housing asset, you pay around 600 euros a month, and maybe you do not have a lot of community spaces, creating social value from that angle. But well, if you cannot afford 1,000, this might be your solution for another point of creating social value from an investor's perspective.
Do you think it's the responsibility to kind of drive affordability ultimately falls on the investor, or more could there be more done from the kind of municipality or local authority level?
Well, they basically could do more, but if you and I can. Well, if we speak for Germany, well, we've had a lot of subsidized housing, but those assets or apartments, they have a duration of subsidizing for 25 years, and then this ends and goes to the free market. So basically, I mean, this is where the problem came up, because
what happens then?
Yeah, it ends.
It all ends at the same time, more or less, now in Berlin,
more or
for
less, yes.
example.
And there's not being constructed enough. So, and this is, I think, the way at the moment where investors and developers and municipalities need to work together. So, for example, that's what happened in Hamburg. It was not only the case that the municipality said, okay, developers, you're going to do this, this, and this. No, this was the case where a city said, okay, let's sit together with the developers, with the industry, and talk about how can we do this to also bring people into the city who cannot afford this, to make a concept of how can we bring subsidized housing into free housing projects.
Yeah.
And I think that is quite a successful example, but actually for residential. So.
Yeah, but not. Well, I don't think we are now going to residential. There's a lot of need for residential in all segments, but if you only add now residential to an area, that's not really a livable or vibrant city or place to be. So you have to add also other kind of functions.
I think with not only constructing an asset with 40, 50 apartments, if we're talking about creating new districts, I mean, we see that planning is totally different, that if there's 1,000 new apartments being created, that all the niche asset classes are in there: student housing, senior living, residential subsidized housing, a bit of commercial. So to bring all together green spaces where people can meet. So I think cities are they are there, and they understood how to create districts.
Tim is ready to jump in with some examples from cities doing this.
Well, maybe two quick examples. One in an obvious and one in a less obvious part of Europe. Both at large scale, but I point firstly to an example, two places I've both come back from in recent weeks. One is the Oslo Cancer Innovation Park. This is a place the only place I've seen where you have a school fully embedded into an innovation and entrepreneurial community. You have anchor institutions that are global in focus, that are based there with their headquarters, and you have this whole sort of lifelong approach about how do you both create a patient community, an educational community, an entrepreneurship environment that is going to constantly interact with each other, learn from each other routinely. They are literally sat alongside each other in the same floors and same rooms. And there is this remarkable coherence, and the development partners who are part of that, led, of course, by decisive city leadership, are really committed to that notion, and that's building the ecosystem, building the supply of individuals, creating the future specialism that's going to drive value. In another context completely, in Porto, the Campagna is a district where there's some incredible poverty in this part of eastern Porto, and yet the development partnership involves private real estate players, a lot of student housing developers, and the public-private development corporation committing 20-year vision, rehousing in a very sensitive way, creating all kinds of vocational education for people that are growing there. And all of the placemaking is the tip of the iceberg beneath all of the hard work. Yeah. They invest in the capacity of the relationship so that this is not forced upon those who are experiencing change, but they see what the point in the vision is. So I think those are two examples, different contexts, all of which I think show the power of capable public leadership supported by a willing and can-do private leadership, and through that you can see great things happen.
Yeah. Well, I think it will really help the real estate industry and the municipalities if they work more together, of course, that always helps, but also to work on research to prove how it will add value to your location, to your area, and it can help be with placemaking to really start something off. And that was the beginning of our session, how we can scale social value. Mm-hmm. That can be one of the drivers.
Yeah, agreed. I think public-private partnerships are a great idea. Sadly, not always the easiest things to bring about or bring together, but I think this is a really worthwhile cause, social value, and scaling it, and finding ways to do it better. And I think the more we can share ideas across different regions and across different companies, and really focus in on the really important elements like affordability, like community building, the more we can impact and see change. Yeah. But we do need to also continue measuring it.
Yeah.
Do we have no?
Okay. So it's not the thing that will solve everything, and you have to take into account, as you mentioned, that you have to look city by city and area by area what is needed and what is possible, and also think about the longer term, that when it's no longer students, who is going to live there? I mean, you also mentioned lifelong learning, for example. People learn longer, so are all students young people? Maybe not. So that's also something to add to the discussion.
Looking at intergenerational communities and how they can live well together and affordably together across the continent, I think, is the next step and challenge. And working with public authorities to ensure that there aren't that many barriers placed, in developing these types of sort of hybrid places to live and work and grow in is important. And I think the more we can kind of educate each other on this topic, the farther we'll get.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts from the panel? I think we're nearing the end. Yeah. Burning last words? No?
Question from the audience?
Anyone have a burning question that you want to ask live? Don't be shy.
They will do after the panel.
If not, yes.
Okay.
We are sticking around.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you
Bridget.
So much. Thank you, Adina.
Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.